In a quiet, sleepy village nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, there stood an old stone house known as Willow End. It was a place of peculiar beauty, with its ivy-covered walls and windows that glowed warmly in the evenings. For as long as anyone could remember, it had been a house full of life, laughter, and stories. But the laughter faded the day Clara's mother, Eliza, died. Clara was only 8 years old when it happened, and for months afterward, the house seemed to mourn along with her and her father, Henry. The vibrant garden behind the house withered, the cheerful music of the piano fell silent, and the once delicious aromas wafting from the kitchen disappeared. It was not until a year later that Henry met Eleanor, a woman who would change both their lives forever. Eleanor arrived in their lives one crisp autumn morning. She was tall and graceful, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her smile was polite, but restrained, and her green eyes held a sharpness that suggested she was used to navigating life's difficulties. Henry had met her during one of his business trips to the city. He introduced her to Clara as his dear friend at first, but it wasn't long before Eleanor became his wife and Clara's stepmother. At the wedding, Clara stood stiffly in her ivory dress, her small hand clutching a bouquet of daisies. She couldn't bring herself to smile, not when her mother's memory lingered so strongly in every corner of her mind. Eleanor's attempts to bond with Clara were met with silence or, at best, nods. Eleanor, however, was determined. She moved into Willow End with a trunk full of books, a collection of curious trinkets, and an aura of calm efficiency. She began organizing the household, restoring order to the chaos that had seeped into their lives since Eliza's passing. The villagers watched with quiet interest. Stepmothers, after all, were often whispered about in fairy tales, and rarely were the tales kind. Clara struggled to adjust to Eleanor's presence. She missed her mother fiercely, and resented the changes Eleanor brought. The kitchen no longer smelled of her mother's honey cakes, but of Eleanor's unfamiliar stews and herbal teas. Her father, once so attuned to Clara's feelings, seemed preoccupied with his new wife. The only place Clara found solace was in the garden. It had been her mother's sanctuary, a vibrant tapestry of colors and scents. Eliza had spent hours tending to it, teaching Clara the names of flowers and how to plant seeds. But since her death, the garden had become a shadow of its former self, overgrown and wild. One afternoon, as Clara sat among the weeds, she heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. She turned to see Eleanor standing there, a pair of gardening gloves in one hand and a basket of tools in the other. "This garden needs some love," Eleanor said softly. "I thought you might like to help me bring it back to life." Clara's instinct was to refuse, to turn away and retreat into her grief. But something in Eleanor's tone, a mixture of vulnerability and hope, made her hesitate. "Fine," Clara mumbled, not meeting her stepmother's gaze. They began working together in the garden. At first, their conversations were sparse and practical. "Hand me the trowel. Should we plant daisies here?" But as the weeks went by, the garden began to bloom, and so did their connection. Eleanor told Clara stories about her childhood in the city, about the library, where she used to spend hours reading fairy tales, and about her late father, who had taught her to love plants. Slowly, Clara found herself sharing memories of her mother, how she used to sing while pruning roses, her laugh that seemed to echo like a melody in the air. Though Clara didn't realize it at the time, the garden was becoming a bridge between the past and the present. Eleanor was away in the village. Clara wandered through the house. She found herself standing in front of a door she had never noticed before. It was tucked away at the end of a narrow corridor on the second floor. The door was locked. Curiosity burned within her. What could Eleanor be hiding? Clara imagined all sorts of sinister things, hidden treasures, forbidden books, or even a dark secret about her stepmother's past. When Eleanor returned, Clara couldn't contain her curiosity. "What's behind the locked door upstairs?" she blurted out. Eleanor's expression shifted, her usual calm demeanor flickering for just a moment. "That's just a storage room," she said, her tone light but firm. "Nothing interesting, I assure you." Clara didn't believe her. That night, as the house settled into silence, Clara crept out of bed. She tiptoed to the mysterious door and tried the handle again, even though she knew it was locked. What could Eleanor be hiding? The next morning, Clara's frustration bubbled over. She confronted Eleanor at breakfast. "Why won't you tell me what's in the locked room?" Eleanor sighed and set down her teacup. "Clara, there are some things in life that take time to understand. But I promise you, when the moment is right, I'll show you." Clara wasn't satisfied with the answer, but something in Eleanor's voice told her that pressing further wouldn't help. Instead, she focused her energy on the garden. Autumn turned to winter, and though the garden's blooms faded, its structure remained strong, a testament to the work she and Aline had done together. It was during one of those chilly mornings in the garden that Eleanor finally opened up. "You remind me of her, you know," Eleanor said, kneeling beside Clara, as they pruned the frostbitten stems. "Who?" Clara asked, confused. "Your mother," Eleanor replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "I didn't know her, but I feel like I've come to know her through you and this place." Clara looked at Eleanor, surprised. You think so?" Eleanor nodded. "She must have been an incredible woman to raise a daughter like you." For the first time, Clara saw Eleanor not as an intruder, but as someone who genuinely cared about her and her mother's memory. Winter melted into spring, and one day, Eleanor approached Clara with a small brass key in her hand. "It's time," she said simply. Clara followed her stepmother up the stairs, her heart pounding. When they reached the locked door, Eleanor paused before inserting the key. "I've been keeping this room closed because it belonged to your mother," Eleanor explained. "I didn't want to intrude on something so personal until I felt you were ready to share it with me." Clara's eyes widened. She hadn't expected this. Eleanor unlocked the door and stepped aside, letting Clara enter first. Inside, the room was filled with her mother's belongings, books, sketches, a delicate sewing kit, and even a half-finished painting on an easel. The air was thick with the scent of lavender, her mother's favorite. Tears welled up in Clara's eyes as she ran her fingers over the familiar objects. "I didn't know this was here," she whispered. "I thought you might want to decide what to do with it," Eleanor said gently. For hours, they sat together in the room, going through Eliza's belongings. Clara shared stories about her mother, and Eleanor listened intently, asking questions and laughing at the funny anecdotes. As the years passed, Clara and Eleanor's bond deepened. The garden flourished, becoming a vibrant sanctuary once more. Villagers who visited marveled at its beauty, calling it a symbol of resilience and love. Clara grew to see Eleanor not as a replacement for her mother, but as an addition to her family, a woman who had stepped into their lives during a time of darkness, and helped bring light back into Willow End. Eleanor, for her part, never tried to erase Eliza's memory. Instead, she honored it, weaving her own love and care into the fabric of their lives. By the time Clara turned 18, she understood what Eleanor had meant all those years ago. Some things in life take time to understand. Clara gifting Eleanor a daisy, a small, but meaningful gesture symbolizing acceptance and trust. Clara gifting Eleanor a daisy, a small, but meaningful gesture symbolizing acceptance and trust. Eleanor teaching Clara a new skill, the two sewing together, their laughter overlapping. Clara visiting her mother's grave, placing a bouquet from the newly bloomed garden, Eleanor respectfully standing nearby. Clara's 18th birthday, a vibrant garden party, friends and villagers mingling among the blooms, Eleanor and Henry beaming with pride. Clara reading her mother's diary, a quiet scene in the room, her emotions ranging from tears to smiles. Eleanor tending the garden alone, a peaceful moment, as she reflects on how far they've come, surrounded by life and color. Clara 1 and Eleanor planting a tree, a wide shot of them working together, the sapling symbolizing growth and unity. Final shot of Willow End House, the garden in full bloom, sunlight streaming through the windows, and the laughter of Clara and Eleanor echoing in the background.